tumbling through 1,000 centuries. You don't know where you land. It's so dark in mythology. Treasures of history to be found. Hear the legends of time. All the handiworks remain. Only dream away. Orion, not yet. Orion, not yet. Orion, not here.
Hello again. Season 12 ran from the 28th of December 1974 until the 10th of May 1975. This is one of the most important years in the show's history. This is the season that introduced the single most iconic incarnation of the Doctor, and he's teamed up with the most iconic companion. The stories aren't always great, but this is a very special season. Now, when a production team took over the show, the groundwork for the next few stories was usually already laid, so the new guys couldn't get creative immediately. Philip Hinchcliffe, who replaced Barry Letts as the producer, officially took over with the second story, The Ark in Space, but he wouldn't really get to flex his muscles until later on. And flex them he would. Now, Tom Baker probably had the second most interesting circumstances leading up to him getting the role of the Doctor. He had done several feature films, including a Harryhausen Sinbad movie and a Pasolini film, but when he was cast he was between acting jobs and working on a building site. Rumour has it he didn't even have a suit, and the BBC costume department had to find one for him to wear at the press conference announcing him as the new Doctor. And if you're interested in what life was like for the others before they were the Doctor, Hartnell was a stock actor who specialised in playing tough characters like sergeants and criminals. Troughton was a constantly working character actor. Pertwee was a radio comedian. Davison was really famous for playing a vet on All Creatures Great and Small, one of the big shows of the day. Colin Baker was mostly a theatre actor who'd impressed the producer by entertaining people at a wedding. Colin was the first Doctor who didn't have to audition for the part. The Doctor was Sylvester McCoy's first serious acting role. He was a former bodyguard, stuntman, children's entertainer, carny, busker, human blockhead, and at one point held a record for having ferrets down his trousers.
Jesus.
But back to season 12. Barry Letts left after the first story, so he cast the new Doctor. He was the first man to cast more than one Doctor. Originally, Letts had planned for the fourth Doctor to be more like the first. They auditioned a lot of older actors and even offered it to a few, but no one was interested. John Pertwee had made the part his own, and most people thought that following him would be career suicide. Tom Baker's casting was possibly a desperate gamble, but it was one that paid off amazingly well. His look was inspired by this painting by Toulouse-Lautrec. The reason his scarf is so insanely long is because the BBC sent a bunch of wool to an old woman to make the scarf, but they didn't give any instructions about how long it was supposed to be, so she just used all the wool they sent. They were going to cut it down to a normal length, but they saw that Tom would use it as a prop or a tool, and so it stayed. He lasted for 7 seasons, and over that time his look changed a lot. Mostly little pieces here and there, it's constantly evolving. Now, Pertwee's costume had changed in similar ways over the years, but these two are pretty much unique in Classic Who. 1, 2, 5, 6 and 7's looks changed, but not by much. Certainly nothing compared to how much 3 and 4's changed. Anyway, on to Season 12, Story 1, Robot. And this is the worst Doctor debut story until the twin dilemma with Colin Baker. The Doctor's in the middle of his post-regeneration madness, which is taking the form of him having no idea what's usual clothing for the 1970s. Or the 1980s. If this is the 1980s. The show gave out contradictory information about when the unit stories were set. Anyway, all in all, as post-regeneration madnesses go, it could be much worse. Although he did run off in the TARDIS and fuck up a computer. But I'll get to that in the Face of Evil in a couple of seasons' time. Now, for Barry Letts' last story, he's taken the interesting choice of making this a John Pertwee story with a different Doctor in it. It's an Earthbound menace, there's Unit, and the Doctor is driving around in Bessie. At the time, this felt entirely natural because that's what the show had been for the last 5 years. But looking back, it's really weird to see the icons of the third Doctor with the wrong Doctor. It's a bit like if Matt Smith's first story had him teaming up with Rose and Jackie Tyler. The story is a riff on King Kong and features a giant robot that keeps growing and kidnaps Sarah Jane. It's the first story in the Tom Baker era that brazenly borrows from recognisable already existing stories. The first of many, and it's one of the worst. Now, I said earlier they'd originally intended for the fourth Doctor to be a lot older, and so in preparation for that they had cast Ian Marter, who had appeared in Carnival of Monsters, as Harry Sullivan, a military doctor who could handle the strenuous stuff. They were going to try and create a first Doctor and Stephen type dynamic, but with Tom Baker's casting, poor Harry was pretty much surplus to requirements, and it didn't help that he was pretty much always written as a blithering idiot. Harry lasted until Terror of the Zygons in season 13. Robot is pretty much a last hurrah for the Pertwee era, and honestly it deserved much better. This is a must-see, but it's also fucking terrible. The Doctor, Sarah and Harry leave in the TARDIS and end up in the far future. The space station Nerva. Remember the beast below? Where most of the human race are off in ships because the Earth's been fucked up? Well, that's roughly set at the same time as this. After those country ships left, some humans stayed in cryosleep in a space station in orbit, waiting for the planet to recover. An ark, in space, if you will. Also on board the station are the evil Wirren, an insectoid race who reproduce by laying eggs inside other life forms, who then slowly transform into adult Wirren. It's a fucking horrific idea. This is basically classic Doctor Who does Alien. One of Philip Hinchcliffe's chief ideas was that the show needed to branch out from a mostly child audience to a mostly adult one. So he upped the horror factor. I'm guessing he was onto something because the show was never more popular than it was under him. Although the adult Wirren looked okay, or as okay as they were liable to look on the show's budget, the poor half-mutated people were literally covered in green bubble wrap. Don't ever say that the special effects guys couldn't think outside the box. Luckily the effects had improved a little the next time people were slowly and horribly mutated into green aliens. Because yes, that happened again. Same Doctor, different aliens. This story introduced something that became quite common in the Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat eras. The Doctor giving a humanity is fucking amazing speech.
Homo sapiens. What an inventive, invincible species.
Here he talks about how humans are amazing survivors, and it's a good speech. It's just a pity that it happens so much now that it's cheapened a bit. After the arc, the TARDIS crew transmat down to the Earth to set a signal going to let the rest of humanity know that the Earth is safe again for habitation, and we enter the Sontaran Experiment. These two are really a 6-part story that's been split into a 4-parter and a 2-parter. On Earth, some astronauts from one of the escaped ships, again, the sort seen in The Beast Below, have returned because they came across a distress call. But the distress call was a trap, sent by Steyr, a Sontaran who's doing reconnaissance on the human race as a prelude to an invasion. His idea of reconnaissance is torturing humans to death to better work out ways to efficiently kill them. Now, let me be clear, I love the Sontaran Experiment, regardless of its many, many warts and problems. It's the sort of simple, brutal story that I really think should be tried again. It's the show at its darkest and most unpleasant in a very visceral way. It's not the sort of story that can be solved with some clever words, or a quip, or by pressing random buttons. Although ironically Steyr is killed by someone pressing buttons. Almost randomly. My point is that regardless of the problems, and I will list some of them, this is a story that should be watched by new Who fans. Its tone is so different, it's so bleak and so brutal, but at the same time it's about 45 minutes long. This is like watching an episode of New Who made in the 70s. If nothing else, it's an interesting experience if you're not used to the classic show. Now its problems. The robot looks like shit. Why the hell would the Sontarans do this to gather that information? There must be better and more efficient ways. Like, maybe reading a future wiki article in Humanity or something. Why are the Sontarans at the same technology level in the far future as they were in the Middle Ages? And of course, the big one, we've a fight scene between Steyr and the Doctor, when Tom Baker had injured himself so he couldn't really take part. And the guy who played Steyr was ill from the heart problems that killed him not long afterwards. The fight scene is a complete fucking mess. They take the time to ram home the Sontaran's cloning when Sarah Jane briefly thinks that Steyr is Lynx from the Time Warrior. Of course the impact is ruined somewhat because they had Kevin Lindsay use a completely different mask, so they look nothing alike. This was because Lindsay had lost a lot of weight, because he was, in retrospect, dying at the time. You can even see that Lindsay had lost even more weight between having the cast made and filming in the mask, because it's really fucking loose. It's really sad. Kevin Lindsay was great, the original and best Sontaran. Anyway, overall I suggest you at least watch this story, even if post-apocalyptic Earth looks like some English moorland. At the end of the story, the TARDIS crew transmat back to the station, but are interrupted by the Time Lords who send them back in time and across the universe to avert the creation of the Daleks. This is the classic story of the early Tom Baker era. By introducing Davros, the creator of the Daleks, it completely changed the way they operated from now on. Not for the better, because it pretty much reduced them to being Davros's soldiers, but it certainly changed them. This gave the Fourth Doctor his most iconic moment, as he contemplated the butterfly effect his destroying the Daleks would have in the future.
Just touch these two strands together, and the Daleks are finished. Have I that right?
To destroy the Daleks, you can't doubt it.
This is officially the beginning of the Time War. The Time Lords saw that the Daleks would one day eclipse them, and so this is an attempt at pre-genocide. And the Daleks took it personally. Now, the Daleks have always been inspired by the Nazis, but this took the idea to the nth degree. The Khalids, the race that became the Daleks, wear clothes like this, do this salute, and the one thing I don't care for in this story is how on the nose the Khalid-Nazi connections are. It's distracting. I'm constantly half wondering when the Nazis started a space program that included intergalactic travel, or trying to come up with a way to fit this and Iron Sky in the same continuity. There's other issues too, like how can these two sentient individual species that look pretty much identical be having a technologically advanced war when their only cities are about a mile from each other? There's also the accidental hilarity of having Lieutenant Gruber from Alo as a Khalid soldier.
Our battle cry will be total extermination of the Thals!
Who is Lieutenant Gruber? Well, this guy.
Shouting and favoring the of leader!
And then into the bunker for a quick snog with Ava.
You're right. The danger does outweigh the excitement.
Alo was made long after this, but it kind of ruins your ability to take him seriously as an alien Nazi when his most famous role is as a flamingly camp Nazi in a sitcom about the French Resistance. If you haven't seen Alo, then check it out, but watch this first. Michael Wisher, who played Davros, had earlier been one of the Dalek voice actors in the 3 Pertwee Dalek stories. It's a nice and subtle touch to link him with his creations. The rest of the links, like the wheelchair and the one eye, are nice, but they're about as subtle as the Daleks themselves. Now, Wisher based his performance as Davros on the philosopher Bertrand Russell.
Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
The moral thing I should wish to say to them is very simple. I should say, love is wise, hatred is foolish.
I have no idea why he chose Bertrand Russell. When it comes to villain inspiration, that's about as random as Carl Sagan.
If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Suppose I cut a piece out of this apple pie. Crumbly, but good.
Seriously, what the fuck? One of the great supporting characters in this story is Nider, Davros' right-hand man.
There's something different about those two. They're not Thals and they're not mutants.
We'll find out what's different about them by autopsy.
The most effortlessly creepy guy in Doctor Who history. Anyway, Terry Nation completely rewrote what little we had previously found out about Dalek history with the 6-parter, but it's well worth a watch. The last story of the season is Revenge of the Cybermen. The crew arrived back on the space station Nerva about thousands of years before the events of the Ark in Space. It's the first appearance of the Cybermen since the invasion in Season 6, and they were handled so badly that they didn't appear again until Earthshock in Season 19. Anyway, Nerva is orbiting the planet Voga in the last days of the Cyber War. So, Cybermen shenanigans. This is 4 episodes long, and setting it on Nerva was an obvious cost-saving measure. Even if it makes no fucking sense that the space station would still exist and be identical thousands of years in the future. All I can say is that they really built space stations to last back in the... whenever in the future this is set. This story introduced the Cybermen's allergy to gold, a weakness that is sometimes used rationally but usually used ridiculously. The new show was wise to jettison it. Next time we see the Cybermen, their look will be a little bit different, and the story will be much better. But that's not for a few seasons, and then a few more, and then another couple. This is the story that introduced what would later be called the Seal of Rassilon. It's a Voga symbol that in a few years is used as the Time Lord symbol. Doctor Who fans, being blessed with lots of time and a tenacious obsession to make everything make sense, came up with an explanation for that. They come up with explanations for everything. The 2 best parts of the Doctor Who fandom are its ability to come up with reasons to explain away the most ridiculous shit that makes no fucking sense, and their love of complaining. You can tell which of these I gravitate to more. So the TARDIS arrives back in time from the Ark in Space here in Nerva and meets the crew just in time to head home and end the season. This season is really fucking important, and has great parts, and some really bad parts. It's very up and down. It's like it can't agree on a quality level, so it's all over the place. But on average, its space stuff is better than most of Pertwee's space stuff, while its Earth-based stuff is not as good as Pertwee's Earth-based stuff. Tom Baker hit the ground running, Elizabeth Sladen was good as usual, and I really like Ian Marter as the dry and reserved but really fucking stupid Harry Sullivan. Anyway, join me next time when we'll meet David Tennant's favourite monsters, the Zygons. We'll meet the best voiced villain in Doctor Who history, and we'll see exactly how blatant they can be with ripping off other stories.
Measure